Secunder, first of all, there seems to be absolute chaos on the ground tonight again.
Well, at the airport, yes. I mean, I was there a little earlier today and saw a crowd of well over 1,000 people, including many families with small children, gathered outside the entrance to the airport, desperate to get inside. The Taliban firing in the air, beating people with sticks, trying to exert some kind of crowd control. Many of the people who are gathered there don't have visas. They are unfortunately very unlikely to be granted any kind of permission to board any of these evacuation flights, but they're so desperate to get out of the country that that's what they've decided to do, and they're taking those risks anyway. And in fact, some of those even more chaotic and even more horrific scenes that we saw earlier this week at the airport were triggered by rumours, false rumours of course, that Canada and America had suddenly decided to allow Afghans who wanted to leave the country to leave and to board these planes without having any of the necessary paperwork. And those rumours really triggered a great deal of interest amongst Afghans who wanted to leave and led to huge crowds coming to the airport. The scene in the rest of the city, certainly in the centre, is very different though. I mean, you know, I was there in Shara now, that's the kind of main kind of shopping centre, or the kind of main high street, if you will, of Kabul. People there were going to the shops, going to the restaurants, eating ice cream, some semblance of normality coming back, although there is a big Taliban presence everywhere you go. So, I mean, you can walk down the street and you'll see a fighter strolling around with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on his back. You will see, you walk around the corner and there'll be a vehicle commandeered from the Afghan army or Afghan police full of Taliban fighters wielding, you know, heavy assault rifles. So they're everywhere, and it's quite surreal to see that. But other than the airport, in the centre of the city at least, there's an air of calm. Of course, for many Afghans, though, who have links to the government, despite what the Taliban have said about granting an amnesty to them, they're deeply concerned that it's only a matter of time before they are targeted by the group.
I want to ask about the political situation in a moment, but first, this problem with a corridor of safe passage to the airport, the US Embassy says it can't guarantee it, and we're not talking necessarily just about Afghan nationals. We're talking about people from other countries, other nations, who cannot get through to the airport at the moment.
Well, it is a challenge, and my understanding is that some of the people who have been successfully evacuated have been taken in convoys, that the access for those convoys has been negotiated with the Taliban by Western and Qatari officials. But it's certainly a major issue, and it's a major issue for individuals and families who want to get to the airport, who have permission to get to get on board those flights, but are worried because the situation outside is so chaotic that it's hard for them to do so. So that is certainly a major challenge.
So tell me, just what about political developments tonight?
Well, last night, one of the deputy leaders of the Taliban, Mullah Baradhi, is a founding member of the group. He flew in from Doha, where they have a political office, to Kandahar, which is the kind of spiritual home of the Taliban. Today, Anas Haqqani, a member of the rather notorious Haqqani family, deeply entrenched in the Taliban's leadership, alleged to be responsible for some of its most brutal actions. He's been in Kabul meeting the former President Hamid Karzai, as well as Dr. Abdullah, another senior Afghan political figure. Now, the Taliban have insisted that they want to form what they call an inclusive Islamic government, but they've always been very vague about what that means. Many suspect they've been deliberately vague about what that means because they don't want to cause fractures within their own group. But now that they've taken control of this country, the bigger challenge is going to crop up now: how to transform themselves from an insurgency into a functioning government.
Secunder Kermani, thank you very much indeed. Well, according to Amnesty International, there are already 2.6 million registered Afghan refugees in the world, the second highest number after Syrians. As yet, there's very little detail as to how the new bespoke UK Afghan refugee system would work. where they'd be dispersed to and how much it would cost, not least in additional funds for the NHS and Education for many complex needs. A guide to all operate is the Syrian Resettlement scheme, but that was not without its detractors. Here's Sima Kotecha.
They want to get out as more Taliban come in. Desperate and fearful, wanting to stay at home but having to get away. Now the UK is promising to help. Britain says it'll take 20,000 refugees over a number of years. This is on top of the 5,000 or so already being relocated under a different scheme. Women, girls and minorities who face tyranny and oppression will be prioritised. I spoke to a woman in Kabul who didn't want to be identified.
My friends are applying for any possible chance or visa which is available for them to get out of the country as soon as possible, because they think like Taliban is not a government and they already have an image of Taliban in their head and they don't trust them. So that's why these visa that they're, which is requested by a lot of international countries, they are trying to apply to them and leave the country as soon as possible.
The refugee scheme is loosely based on the 2015 Syrian Refugee Resettlement programme. It focused on taking refugees from camps in neighbouring countries. More than 20,000 were relocated to the UK.
We will do more, providing resettlement for thousands more Syrian refugees.
However, that scheme drew criticism, with some accusing it of taking far too long.
I think the Syrian resettlement scheme has been a really important one, had huge support from across the country, but the government was very slow to get it up and running in the first place. And right now we're in an immediate crisis. We can't wait many months. We need something that can operate immediately. And that's why I think the government should use the framework set up by the old scheme, not set up something new, just use that to get it moving immediately and also expand their existing programme to help Afghan interpreters to also include those who worked, for example, on UK aid programmes and as contractors to the UK government who currently aren't being protected at all and who are targets now for the Taliban forces.
Earlier, even the Home Secretary said the system needs fixing.
I'm creating a bespoke legal scheme to resettle people in the United Kingdom in the right and proper way. We want to stop flows of illegal migration, which is why through the Nationality and Borders Bill, the work that we're bringing forward fundamental structural changes to the asylum system. The asylum system is broken. It's been broken for 20 years. This is the first government in a long time that is seeking to bring about these changes.
Ministers are calling on other nations to do their part. Already, France has put out some tough rhetoric saying it doesn't want a repeat of the Syrian refugee crisis, when migrants were turning up on European borders. And there are concerns here that a larger population will put further pressure on stretched resources, such as the NHS. But some charities are concerned that not all those who need letting into the UK will be allowed in straight away.
5,000 is a good start, but should not be a target or a limit, but that the government continues to review the situation and what is happening in Afghanistan. It is the case throughout the world and has been for decades that governments really look at the situation, how it evolves, in order to make these decisions.
The uncertainty of Afghanistan's future is fueling fear and panic, while the world is deciding exactly if and how to help. But there are some there who aren't letting go just yet.
This is my country, and I don't want to leave my motherland in this situation. And I want to stay, I want to fight back, because if they're giving me a chance to go to school, to go to work, even with the Islamic dress code, I'm more than happy to stay and work. So my red line, my freedom is those two rights. But if those red lines are crossed by the Taliban, I will leave the country.
Sima Kotecha. Well, earlier I spoke to the president of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani. Her country has agreed to process refugees for the United States. I began by asking her, as a former refugee herself, how she now felt watching developments in Afghanistan unfold.
These are really heartbreaking scenes. As a former refugee myself, we are really feeling this every single day. This really amounts to a human tragedy, and I can absolutely say that nobody ever really wants to leave their home unless there is horrific violence and terror, as we can see now in the case of Afghanistan.
So you made a deal with the US back in July to take refugees and process them for America. But was this the scenario that was really being envisaged back in July?
I believe since then, there was at least some information that the employees that worked with the US Army, with the US organizations there might be in danger at some point in time, but no one really knew exactly when, or at least we in Kosovo didn't. But we were ready, and we showed that readiness without hesitation.
So how many refugees can Kosovo take and process them ready to be forwarded to America?
The exact number is still being discussed, but we're not going to be the country to say no to these refugees, to these people in need, if we have the space in. As much space we have, we're going to use it to shelter them. So
when do you expect your first Afghan refugees?
Probably we will have some arriving sooner than we expected. At the beginning, we thought that it will be a couple of weeks and we will have more time to prepare, but it looks like for some there is a much bigger urgency compared to some others. We're in touch with our US partners who are doing, as I said, they're compiling the list, but at the same time doing the security vetting. Since there will be meetings in the next 2 or 3 days, the exact dates will be known only then.
Do you envisage Kosovo as a permanent corridor through to America for as long as Afghan refugees need it?
This is not an issue that we've discussed with the United States, but if that is needed, we are ready to discuss this and we are ready to offer that shelter. It is extremely important that, first of all, as human beings, but secondly, as leaders, we show leadership in these kind of very tough situations for humanity. We need to understand that if we don't work together, we will not be able to be successful. And the case of Kosovo shows that only when the United States, the United Kingdom, and other members of NATO got together, they managed to beat the genocidal regime of Milosevic and bring peace to the entire Western Balkans, not just our country.
You've talked about the Kosovan experience leading you to make this big gesture about accepting Afghan refugees. And I wonder what you make of governments, for example, the UK government, which has said it will take 5,000 this year, 5,000 next year, 5,000 next year, and so on, that there is an urgency that some people who are living in fear of their lives under the new Taliban system won't be able to wait till next year. They probably face a death sentence now. So what do you feel about putting these quota numbers on?
Look, I was a refugee myself. It's not like those who persecute you ask you whether you want to leave now or you want to leave in a year. No one leaves because they want to. They leave out of utter desperation. And for that reason, I would really call on all the democratic governments out there to give their hand of help the same way that they did to all of us here in Kosovo, and bring at least some safe haven to these people that have been forced because of the terror that they have been going through. If Kosovo, as a very small Balkan country, can do it, every other country can do it. We just need to show our big heart.
And you're working hand in hand with the US, but I wonder how you look into Afghanistan and you see how one country can disrupt in a way the entire world. What do you make of the fact that they're able to act almost with impunity?
It does show how fragile peace in the world is, and it does show that commitment needs to continue, especially by political alliances, political and military alliances such as NATO, who have a specific obligation to step up in these kind of situations. So I do hope that, once again, members of NATO individually, but at the same time, NATO as an organization, will know how to deal with this very fragile security and humanitarian situation.
Finally, who do you think in that region can exercise any kind of control or any influence? Is it India? Is it Pakistan? Is it China? Is it Iran? Is there anybody, do you think, any nation, any particular grouping of nations that can have some leverage in Afghanistan?
Perhaps I would answer the question on who should, and that is the people of Afghanistan. They should have a say. Unless that happens, we will not see peace and democracy in that country, no matter how much other countries around the region try to help, or sometimes not, because we see that the Russian influence is never anywhere in the world a positive one in terms of peace and security and development and stability. But I think that only when we see that the people of Afghanistan are having a say on what's happening and on their fate, we will not be seeing or listening any positive news from that region, unfortunately, or that country specifically.
Madam President, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.